Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome. We are so excited about this and excited that you guys are here. I'm definitely used to chat and Q&A. We taught on Zoom for a year and a half. So we'd love if you have questions or anything, you could pop them in the chat. And we'd love to be able to communicate that way and feel like we're not just having a conversation with each other, which we do all the time.
We had a chance to look through some of the profiles. And honestly, I would have loved to have just sat and had everybody else on Zoom tell their stories and just got to sit and listen to them. So many interesting backgrounds and things like that. It was really cool to read. So we're supposed to wait a minute or two until everybody's been loaded into the thing here.
And it's funny because we don't have the control. So, oh, there we go. There we go. I see it.
All right. I don't see it, but I've got the main screen, so you let me know.
All right. You could see in Shelley's room all of those beautiful guitars. And I think you have a pride flag back there. What you don't see is our Dodgers shelf. Yes, we were so excited about coming to Albuquerque, just because we love all getting to meet new people and getting to connect with our friends there. And so we were sad, but we're definitely, we're definitely excited that Q Christian Fellowship still, has this way to do this online, and yay for technology.
Yeah.
Oh yes, Elizabeth, go Dodgers. Dodgers fans. All right, my love, you want to start? Oh, that's our Jackie Robinson. All of our bobbleheads.
All right, so this, as you can tell, is going to be a bit of interaction between the two of us because, well, here we both are as speakers. So from time to time, I'm hoping that Allison will be jumping in and then sharing on her own as well. But the beginning part is really kind of my journey, which has almost been a 50-year journey. So I can imagine that some of you maybe have been on a journey that seems like a long time, but I think a day can feel like a long journey when it's difficult. But perhaps there's something here from where I started to where I am now that will help make sense to some of the people out here. All right. And if so, then please let us know. If it doesn't make any sense at all, send your emails to Allison at zoom.com. So in trying to think of how to begin, or, a great quotation to use, I went right to Calvin and Hobbes because it made a lot of sense to me. Selective realities. And the author of, or the drawer, whatever one called him, cartoonist, creator, Bill Watterson is his name. I liked this comment. It's not denial. I'm just very selective about the reality I accept. And Allison and I had a few talks about this, like, can you clarify? And I said, I don't know. And she did. And here's what we came up with, which is exactly what I meant. By accepted or selective realities, I mean, for this session, realities we feel forced or compelled to function under in order to survive. particularly as evangelical Bible Christians. And that is part of, I think, what we go through. How do we hold these things that may feel like they're dual ideas at the same time? And why do we hold to some that we in the back of our mind think, well, maybe I don't? And that explains a lot of really where my journey was, is holding multiple ideas, and sometimes ones I was positive I was not sure about. The path that we start from is not always where we think we're going to, end up. And so how do you prepare for it if you don't know where you're going? George Harrison once sang, if you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there. The path I feel like that brought me here can be nothing more than providential, like God ordering steps that I had no idea along the way. But why does it sometimes take a while on not preparing? Because we inherit certain realities, right? Certain things that were handed down to us. And then it takes a while before we're comfortable perhaps doubting, maybe much longer before we can deconstruct and reconstruct. I found this on very interesting. The illiterate, Alvin Toffler says, the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Wow, that really spoke to me. It is, I think, maybe part of the journey that many of us are on, that it required that we learned and we studied. And, if we were evangelical or began in that way, we studied diligently and tried to memorize and learn and, and then share, and then you become invested in it, right? But here we are in an age where perhaps letting go of some things has been difficult. So, how do we see or understand our world when it feels as if we're living in two truths at the same time? This is part of my journey. And I think this is explained in this verse from Mark chapter 9, verse 24. I do believe truth, but help me overcome my unbelief. Truth, right? And it seems like, how can this both be? I believe, help me overcome my unbelief. I remember sitting in many sermons when I was younger, explaining how this doesn't mean what it obviously means. But there is the sense in which I think the idea of belief and unbelief held at the same time is something that we inherit as a binary decision because of society. Everything is a binary decision. And so it makes it difficult to accept something like belief and unbelief at the same time. It's either A or B. It is either black or white. It is believe or doubt. It is man or woman. It is gay or Christian. All of these, like, you must make a decision one way or the other. It can't be both and. And maybe, honestly, as people who've been in education, there's a lot of guilt perhaps to be laid at the habit of so many. Every decision is A, B, or C, as opposed to other, right? And in other, there's a lot of room to think and to re-examine and to research. But when it's A, B, and C, we tend to know everything, right? Because that's the right answer and somebody told us so. And then moving off of it can be difficult. And so we all learn in the same way, particularly because when we're children, we have to learn how to just obey without questioning. That's what keeps us alive, right? Stop, come, eat, sleep, right? There's just like certain neurological and linguistic triggers that help us to form, means of survival. And as children, obedience and understanding kind of a world in binaries is critical to staying alive. But then we hit adolescence. And speaking of myself, there was a point at which I began to seriously doubt and have some questions, because like most teenagers, we work with them. every day, all day long. So that's quite an experience in education, just being around them all the time. It's great. It does keep you young, but reminds you of what it feels like. But in some cases, certainly in my own case, questioning anything, moving from childhood to adolescence, was not a rewarding experience. It was more of a punishing and consequential type of an experience. Um, my household did not really embrace the idea of moving from childhood to adolescence by questioning, certainly not questioning the primary authority in the house, which in my house was my father. So, what does that mean? That means you have to hold your doubts and things like this in silence, right? Learning to smile effectively and not let people know that you have um, doubts and you perhaps disagree. Some of those things when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, that caused me some manner of like, well, what about this? Asking questions. I soon learned one was not permitted to ask. Talking donkeys, like, can I have an explanation? Um, the sun that never sets and an earth that stands still while Joshua commands the sun to stop. Um, this didn't seem to go in favor of the science that I was learning at the time. And a question, I thought a valid question, but I learned, again, not so much. A universal flood without historical record, two of all animals on a single floating boat. That was a challenge as well. And then perhaps more pressing at a personal level rather than just a, hey, I've got a question. Oh, I shouldn't ask that. All right. Because of when I was born. Why hippies and gay people were a problem. I was born in the early 60s. So I remember that time period really clearly as a child and walking to school and seeing the protests and the hippies and the Vietnam War on TV and things like this. And I really didn't understand those things, but asking generally resulted in a single binary answer, an explanation I was not to doubt. And then it got a little bit deeper because my father found Jesus on television, Oral Roberts in particular. But it was at the same time that these others were, establishing their points of view, which my father held to and taught us. Jerry Falwell, Anita Bryant. What do these have in common? It's a good question. It was what was in common was the idea that homosexuals were the cause of the Armageddon that was to come, right? The end times would be brought about, and this was the proof. And God was angry, and and so from the list of rules I had growing up as a child and adolescent, now we had even new ones after my father found Oral Roberts and Jesus on TV. But again, there were doubts, a lot of internal questions that were happening during this time. So eventually, one learns through negative reinforcement a number of things. First of all, at the time that I was growing up, there was in my household a lot of shame and judgment over my having long hair. And there I was also keeping a journal and writing poetry and doing all these things that were not very manly. You walk feminine, these type of things. I listened to secular music. I played guitar. Things were not looking very heavenly for me when I was growing up from the standpoint of my church youth group, which I got kicked out of because I was, too feminine looking and long hair made me look like a hippie. And so that was not acceptable. Heaven was not for me. And also, obviously, a lot of the people that I followed musically were also considered taboo in my household. In particular, Bob Dylan was a huge influence for me. That could not be played in the house unless I had headphones on and was hiding in my room. There was, through negative reinforcement, learning how to doubt in secret and smile. Why? the way we all do, right? To try and ease the discomfort others might feel if they suspect we're not in full agreement with them. So we learned these as habits, survival habits, right? Like the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. These are things that we have to like accept so that we can survive the difficulties of doubting if there are consequences to it. And I think we all know, especially in the position where we are today, there are always going to be those that have punishment and consequences. And sadly, they may be the people closest to us. So after being well trained for 17 years, I graduated high school at 17. Being given a lot of negative reinforcement to maintain the inherited realities that were necessary in my house, denial set in, and there was a lot of fear and shame. And what do you do, right, when we're living in this process of holding these, I believe, help my unbelief. I love God, but I'm told God doesn't love me, sort of tensions that we deal with. I found the best place to remove and cover up and secure a safe, pretty path of hiding all those things is where everyone goes. You go to seminary because then you can cover it all up. And I picked one of the most conservative seminaries in the United States, Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. Those were the days of like R.C. Sproul, if anybody remembers Dr. Sproul. He was jokingly referred to at the time as Dead Sea Sproul, only because sometimes his lectures would go on and on and on. But that is where I was trained and taught how to get rid of all uncertainty. And here's how you get rid of all uncertainty. I'm not recommending this, by the way, disclaimer. This is not the path to go on. These are my mistakes or steps along the way to where I was. 5-point Calvinism, talk about certainty. Inerrancy, right, of scriptures, no errors, no real talk about the process of textual transmission and what happens from original documents to copies of documents and copies, and then monastic editions and editor editions and all of the stuff that goes with it. That was not brought up at the time. That was something I had to learn much later. The supreme authority of Scripture alone, and the Bible as the interpreter of science, history, and sex, which is interesting because you're talking about a system of theology and belief of Scripture that was based on 16th century ideas, which supposedly were what the original authors held to and meant, with little more than the same type of enforced, you have to understand and agree, or else there's penalties. And for the first time in my life as an adult and being away from the authority of my household, I thought, this is a good time to ask those questions. I'm paying for my education. What would the penalty be for asking questions? And I found very quickly that there is a penalty for asking questions. And I was told, don't ask any more questions. I was told by one professor, when you ask a question, it's as though you roll a grenade into the middle of my class and it explodes and leaves the whole class incapable of me getting them back. And I never asked a question, which I had sincerely wrestled with for a long time. It wasn't to take him off track or upset the thoughts of any other students. I kind of imagined everybody else had the same questions I did. And I was wrong. And one more time, I learned the consequences and the punishment of asking the question, doubting. I was kind of put in timeout. No more questions for you. And then at my graduation, never been so glad to see anybody leave this institution as you, though I finished with, I think, a 3.98. I was a good student, but, in fact, the only class I didn't get an A in was a class one of my professors helped me set up on ecclesiastical Latin, and it was an advanced course that I had to take. And he was a great professor, my language professor. He later converted to Roman Catholicism from Presbyterianism, so he became persona non grata as well. And weirdly enough, I helped him on his research for history of science while I was there as his research assistant, and He was also one of the contributors to the Reformed Study Bible, which I also had a little bit of a hand in assisting him, which is kind of funny to think about now. But most of my questions got filed into I'm going to get to this later, which meant like I can't deal right now with that whole, I believe, help my unbelief. Okay, we'll just put these here because this is going to have consequences, and this is not the time for it. But there was a file, and it was accumulating, I mean, in my soul and in my file cabinet. Because of the questions I asked, I was affectionately nicknamed, with no affection, Hereticus Anglicanus while I was in seminary. Didn't quite fit in too well, because I had been studying on my own in the basement, strangely as it sounds, right? Like the theological closet I'd been put into. But I was downstairs in the recesses of the library at RTS in the microfiche area, going through the things that I guess you're not supposed to go through. And I discovered this amazing movement in the 19th century called the Oxford Movement, which was really quite the opposite of Calvinistic theology. It focused on incarnational theology, that Jesus became human and dwelt among us and did not condemn that which physical and material, but in fact blessed it and used it to change lives. It was not this angry God sort of Calvinistic approach. Incarnational theology meant that people were motivated with their bodies and with their minds. And this resulted in a movement that followed it called the ritualist movement, where there was this great appreciation of beauty and art and poetry. It was like a renaissance. In architecture as well, the neo-Gothic period, with Pugin as one of the key people in the architectural movement. How do we reveal God in the physical and design it and show it and let the mind be elevated by what we see? This was not Presbyterianism and Calvinism, as you could have seen from the previous slide of the chapel. I used to jokingly tell my professors, if an alien landed on this campus, there is nothing here that would demonstrate to them that this is a religious campus, that there's a belief in anything, which they were very proud of. So another one of those, just keep your mouth shut. But while I was hiding not really hiding, just studying in the basement at RTS and seeing this movement and seeing the reactions of evangelicals against it. And yet it seemed to me the expression of everything I was interested in beauty and ritualism. And here I was writing poetry, and there was a revival of music and songwriting. And this is all in the church in the 19th century, along with a lot of inner city evangelism. But it was this thing that I'm going to get to, the whispers of an unmentionable sin that kind of lingered in the background of this Anglo-Catholic or Oxford movement, ritualist movement, 19th century Church of England movement. Am I going too fast or like lulling anybody to sleep here? I'm sorry.
You're doing good, honey.
I should thank you. I should take a breath and just make sure I'm not losing anybody. Okay. I will. Let me see what's happening here in chat. You're supposed to tell me. Oh, good. Thank you. When you're teaching in a classroom, you get to look at the students' faces and you're like, okay, let me do a little juggling now and get you excited about what's happening. Let me stand on a desk. But here, I'm just praying and hoping, right? So the whispers of the unmentionable. This really had quite a profound effect on me. Let's see. And during this time, I was also ordained a traditional Episcopal priest or traditional Anglican priest, which is different than the Episcopal Church USA, ECUSA, which I'd been told was apostate and everyone in it was going to hell. So the path for me was the more traditional path. Of course, I hope you understand that I'm saying this as what had been handed out as an idea, one I falsely believed at the time. So I'm not in any way whatsoever believing that about the Episcopal Church. In fact, some of my closest friends are priests and members of the Episcopal Church. I love them. So after RTS, I finished my MA there. I went to Oxford University through a strange series of events. I met Alistair McGrath. I was speaking at an event. He was speaking at an event at the time. He was kind of the up and coming evangelical Anglican theologian with all of his books and speaking tours. And we just happened to be booked at the same time and place. I think it was with D. James Kennedy or something in San Fernando Valley. In any case, he, after speaking with me, invited me to apply to Oxford, where he was teaching. I did. I was accepted, much to my disbelief, really. And Alistair was at Wycliffe Hall, along with Dick France and a number of others. And so that's where I moved. In the picture there at Wycliffe points to my bedroom at the top of the school with the gargoyle that was above it. And when I walked in, through all the stairs and all the stairs, I asked the dean of the school at the time, I said, "Do I have to live with a hunchback?" He looked at me and said, "You are the hunchback." So that was my introduction to Wycliffe Hall in Oxford. But even at Wycliffe, I found life a little bit difficult and a bit of an outsider because I was more of an Anglo-Catholic, an Oxford movement person, and Wycliffe Hall was established to oppose that. So most of my work was actually done at Pusey House, which is not far across the street, really almost, and next door to the Eagle and Child or Bird and Baby, where Lewis and Tolkien and the Inklings would meet. So I did a lot of my work there. I ended up later on moving into Pusey House, where the arrow points. It looks very much, both of those look very much still like that. Among the people that I learned from, worked from, was invited to the inner circle to do work with. Alistair McGrath, my primary advisor, Dick France, RT France, who's sadly passed on. He was a great, beautiful man. David Wenham, New Testament scholar. But while I was at Wycliffe, most of my studies still went back to this issue about the Oxford movement. I was still very intrigued by the concept of what incarnational theology meant, because a lot of what I'd been taught was kind of the evils of the body and the evils of things like music and poetry and so forth. And so this movement that was founded largely by Pusey and Newman and Keble was from 1833 to 1845, was known as the Oxford movement, which led into the movement that really, really changed my life the most. It was called the Ritualist movement. One fed into the other. What began as a theological movement moved into more of an expressive movement, not just the theology of incarnation and the sacraments, but into how it was going to be expressed. And among those who really were kind of profoundly influential to me as I was reading their lives, one was Alexander Harriet McConaughey down there, and also one named John Purchase, who, if you could see the cartoon fully, you'd see the bishop is hitting him over the head with the 39 articles while he's dressed in very Anglo-Catholic-y cope, right, like a cape, and he's got a censer to use incense. All the things that a good believer does not do is, reflect the beauty of heaven on earth, the incarnation of Christ visible in all these things. And that movement lasted largely from 1845 to 1874, more specifically. But I said there was something that was like the unmentionable part, and that was this. It appeared that the secret talk in all of the books and the real danger of being Anglo-Catholic was they seemed to, what would be the right word? Maybe turned a blind eye at men who were gay. There was a movement of fraternal organizations of men making life vows to one another, and men who were just clearly, unashamedly in love with other men. And yet, while they were godly and they were Christian and they were going into the slums where nobody else wanted to go, and I'm reading their life and how they brought the gospel to places that the Church of England did not want to go, to the inner city of London, Holborn, and parts like this, East London, that at that time, was famous for Jack the Ripper, not for the church going in. But these people went in, um, and they changed the environment of the inner city and the slums with their belief and their love, their incarnational idea of going to the world, person to person where it was needed. But they were gay. How can this be, right? So my binary system is beginning at this point to no longer hold. It's blowing apart. It's about to implode into where I can never really go back. And it also led me to look not just at the Anglo-Catholic movement, which was part of my studies, and law, which was the major focus of my study at the time, but along with ritualism, what I found was that running parallel to the Oxford movement and to the 19th century was a revival, an interest in gender studies in the 19th century. Well, here's running not only parallel to this revival in the church, but they're now coming together where there are men and women, as well as intersex people who are part of this community, and the studies are starting to come together. And I was passionate about it because it really kind of revealed that for the first time in my life, I could admit that I did not fit myself into the binary system in terms of gender, that I could not fit into the attraction to only one gender. And here I was seeing the beginning of science on it and the questioning that was happening in academia, but also being lived out in the church through the Oxford movement and the ritualist movement. So it was study and following where the trail was leading that I wasn't trying to find, but maybe in trying to hide from myself, I ran into myself wonderfully.
I love that. Sorry. That was really good, honey. We're crocheting that on a pillow.
Okay. So after finishing Oxford with my PhD, I returned back to the States and started ministry. I completed my degree. Obviously, I later on was consecrated a traditional Episcopal Anglican bishop, and this pretty much was beginning to spell the end for me, with the complications of my own belief system, family needs, a close friend at the time who was really going through the same thing, and he and I were in a lot of discussions. Carlton Pearson, who is kind of I don't know, a hero to some, he is to me, and a close friend, but he is a heretic and a horrible man to others. But don't believe that. He's a wonderful man, truly wonderful man. And so at that time, I retired from ministry shortly after like reaching the pinnacle of it. It was no pinnacle for me. It was something I needed to get away from, and swiftly followed a divorce. Time for me to get to that. I'll get to it later file. I stayed out of church for over a decade. Perhaps some of you feel the same way, like you could not grow until you got away from a certain environment. I began to like take a lot of the education that I had shelved regarding misunderstood biblical passages. I went to therapy, which was very helpful. Saw an endocrinologist, which was also very helpful. Became full-time educator, and then met the love of my life, and that kind of led to the next step in life, which was being a GSA advisor. And last thing that I'm going to say is that in that get to later file was this issue of the creation of Adam, like an androgynous person who was male and female. Eve is not created from the dust of the ground. She is part of this first person. And I prefer to say this first person because this first person is male and female and made by a God who is neither male nor female, but described in Scripture with the qualities and attributes of both. This was something that I really had to go back and to revisit, as well as the traditions, the histories, the myths, and Hinduism of androgyny or intermediate sex, alchemy. Um, very important for me was really some studies in Percy Shelley and androgyny and um, understanding really what non-binary was about when the word hadn't existed yet, really. And even his translations of Plato and soulmates in the original creation in the Symposium, as said by Aristophanes. So these were my get to later files, and now finally I could take a breath and my beautiful wife.
Honey, that was wonderful.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. um, so when we first were thinking about submitting a proposal to talk at this conference, I thought initially, okay, honey, I'll be there. I'll cheer you on. And then he's like, no, you're going to talk too. I'm like, what? And so I could talk a little bit about my experience and I grew up in very conservative Baptist household. My grandfather was a pastor and a missionary and the secretary of the Southern Baptist Convention. And so I just grew up always going to church. And my mom still works in ministry and that was my life. But I do have like moments where I think back to my childhood and think back to you know, I had a best friend in middle school and we would hold hands and we would just, and I didn't even know what gay was. Like, not, I was very like, just unaware. So we would just hold hands throughout the campus, and people would say, "Are you lesbians? And are you guys gay?" And I didn't even know, like, what is that? And it didn't like really deter me from just holding her hand. And it was just so beautiful now that I think about it, and like innocent. And I feel like very proud of that little girl who was just so herself. And then as you get older and you're in the youth group and and all of that and experiencing, okay, then you learn what gay is, and then you learn that gay is bad, and you know what I mean. And you learn to I grew up in the True Love Waits movement and all of that, and going to church. I was on the worship team at my youth group and I took it very seriously. And there was one time I had, like, back then before the internet, you had to like write down the lyrics in order of a song in order to learn it. And I wrote down this song, and the lyrics, it was from Mulan. And the lyrics were like something, when will my true reflection show who I am inside? And my mom found it and she thought it was just a letter I had written about myself. And she asked me, Allison, are you a lesbian? And I thought, am I? I didn't know. I was like, maybe I am. I don't know. Like, so I was like so stressed about it. And I remember like just like thinking, oh my gosh, like, am I? Like no one had asked me that question before, my mom. And I remember being very scared about it, because I knew by that point that to be gay was bad. And so, I just kind of pushed it away and said, of course not, mom. That was just a song that I was learning. And I kind of just hid away. And for a long time. And I was in a very bad first marriage, and where it was easy to hide any question of that. Like when you're in an abusive situation, you just think of like survival at that point. And I didn't really think about or readdress any of those like things that I was wondering about when I was younger. Um, and like living in that shame, spiral. And then I met Shelly here, my beautiful, my beautiful partner, and my life changed. And something that you could go to the next slide, honey. Something that he told me that kind of drew him to me was that he saw how I was around my students who were in the LGBTQIA community. And because I like look at them and I see myself in them, sorry for the creepy blocks over their eyes, but we wanted to maintain their privacy. These are just some of our kiddos in our GSA club, and they are magnificent, you guys. I wish that you could be around these brave, brave high school students who, we do good news and they'll raise their hands and they'll tell us, I came out to my parents, and we're just like, okay, how did it go? And they are just incredible. And they're holding Kathy's book, who is in with us right now. And having that access to that book, because it's a very conservative town that we live in. And these kids have taken Kathy's book home. Their parents are reading it. And Kathy, I just hope you're changing lives. You're changing these kids' lives. And it's just so amazing to see. We did the GSA club over Zoom for during COVID, and now that we're back in person, we get to see them every week, and they come into my husband's classroom and is just happy. And it's a spot where they could be who they want to be, and they talk, and it's loud, and sometimes it's chaotic, but they're just an exuberance of joy. And it's really one of my greatest blessings to see these kids and to see myself in them and to see their journey kind of and be a part of it. And so like Ed's here. Hi, Ed. We love you. And so we decided, especially when we took on our GSA club, that we are going to just surround ourselves in community. And we found Amber's group, Amber Canporna's Unashamed Love Collective, which was really amazing because we're around high school kids who are in the LGBTQ community, IA community, but not around adults really. And so we were really thirsty for friendship and thirsty for community. And so my honey here, told me about this book club he signed us up for. And then we got to meet and hear about Ed and Kathy's book. And I remember Shelly reading Kathy's book and saying to me, this is incredible. This is incredible. And that just kind of, when you said in the beginning, honey, that your journey was providential, and sometimes we talk to our students about Plato's Plato's ideals of soulmates and meeting each other. We talk about when we teach Shakespeare, fate versus free will, all of that. But I do think that, and I'm so blessed to see that now I'm in a place and in a relationship and at a church and in a community where that I can be myself, and thankfully I'm married to a brilliant person who I could ask all those questions. I talk about my doubts and say, honey, what's the answer to this? And he's very patient with me.
You want to mention how we ended up at the church?
Yeah, Ed invited us to our church that we love. It's called New Abbey in Pasadena. And it is an amazing, affirming church that after our first visit, we're like, okay, this feels right. And so we're thankful that Ed invited us to come see it, because now it's definitely feeling like home. So then you want to go to the next slide, babes?
Yeah, I'm trying. There we go. So to kind of wrap up the story, I got to listen to you a lot longer. Here's kind of where it comes down to is, if you are on this journey, which in our short poll, so many people are in the journey, and you're wondering, is it possible to move from this place of shame and doubt and fear to faith and fellowship? It is possible. I can assure you, as somebody who has studied at the highest university in the world, who has studied the scriptures in the original language, who's like been passionate as any evangelical could be passionate, and yet also be queer, pansexual, non-binary. Is there a place for you? Does the gospel include you? Yes, the gospel includes you. That is why we wanted to do this. It really wasn't, here's my story. It was, maybe in my story, you'll see yourself. You'll see that it is possible, and it won't take you 50 years of a journey. And here is the key scripture I'd like to bring back. This one has a profound effect in my life. Matthew 9, 10, and 11. While Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And that is the gospel, right? I mean, the question from the religious, from the doubting, from the critical ones, that's where the questioning and the finger pointing comes from, right? But the invitation to dine and to be at the table, that is the gospel. The gospel is Jesus eats and invites you to him. The inclusion of the gospel is for all. And the ones who doubt and criticize and finger point, these are not the ones who are at the table and enjoying the presence of fellowship and in a life that is in the presence of God and love. They're not there. We can pray for them, but I don't want to be them. Certainly, I had my time, and it was not pleasant. This scripture is the gospel. Jesus eats with the sinners. He invites us. So, as our kind of closing points, I'll take the first. So, the first point, going back to Matthew, there is, accept the love of God for you without doubting your worthiness. He doesn't. So we need to stop and speak to ourselves and to be in fellowship with others so that we don't doubt our worthiness. God doesn't. It's the Pharisee. It's the religious. Number two, Allison.
Oh. And there's a question for you in the Q&A, honey, so you can look at it. Come out to safe people. And this is something we share a lot with our students, but we did see on Queer Eye where one of them shared it was not about coming out, but it's about letting people in. And I thought, that was so beautiful. You let people in to see the real you. And what a beautiful, sacred thing, right? And so we have students that it's not safe for some of them to come out, you know, but that desire's there and it's bubbling, but they can come out to us, their teachers, and they could come out to trusted friends or let those friends in, to to experience and commune who their true selves are. And sometimes I think that you know I could even just be like ordering something, online, and I could tell that person, yes, I am pansexual and I'm ordering this because I love it, and I can't wait to wear this, and it could just be in moments like that, and like steps where you feel that it's safe for you. And Joe, I think maybe Shelley could answer your question with talking about number 3. Did you see it, honey? I can read
Yeah,
it to you.
yeah.
I'm curious about your experience coming back into the church in general after you were away for 10 years. Was it painful? How did you find a place back in the church? And how did you find a new spiritual practice?
That's a great question. Um, was it difficult? Yes, extremely painful. When I had reached out to Ed, when I saw that he was from Southern California, I thought, well, maybe here's somebody that I can talk to, and maybe I can contribute something in terms of like help or whatever from my background to help with the work that he and Kathy are doing. I just like want to reach out to him, and he replied, which forever I'm grateful for, Ed, forever grateful. And he said, well, I'm going to church this Sunday. We could meet there. That I was not thankful for. not, at the, not at the time, not at the time. But I also thought, well, okay, take a deep breath. And it wasn't the distance. We live almost an hour and a half from Pasadena. But it was frightening, honestly, the thought of going back into a church. And then New Abbey is kind of like not your traditional Episcopal church, that's for sure. So that made me even more nervous. And then they have these little group chats and things, and I was like, oh man, like I'm going from nowhere into like full immersion quickly. Um, but I felt very welcomed, and I felt very supported and affirmed, and I loved the church. It didn't take probably 15 minutes before, I leaned over to Allison and said, we're definitely coming back here. And how do you feel about this? And she's like, absolutely, yes, we are. Um, so yeah, it was very painful. It was very difficult. And there have been some opportunities to get involved. We're a long way from the church, but um, maybe the time will come where I could step back in. It's possible. I will say that I'm open to anything at this point in my life, but for over 10 years, no, I didn't really want to pray during those 10 years. And when people say, would you pray for me? I would say, no, I really don't want you to ask me to do that right now, but I will be thinking of you. It was very hard. So in that long transition, there was a lot of deconstructing and reconstructing.
And how did you find a new spiritual practice?
Um, I think once I could accept that I was accepted by God. That was the critical thing. Like it didn't matter if I didn't go to church. It didn't matter if Christians didn't accept me. I was like secure in by that point through a lot of reading. Honestly, there was a lot of reading, and there was some personal therapy also, and there was a lot of breaking up during that time. Um, and I really was just more of angry at God and blaming God for all the losses and pains I was going through. Um, but um, I will say my spiritual life began to grow the more that I found self affirmation And then when we started joining these other groups, that was like over a year ago. Our first visit to New Hampshire was over a year ago.
Well, and then you started reading. I mean, probably how many books do you have on uh, on this?
Um,
Uh, a lot. and he
yeah, yeah, it goes back a long time.
and
So
he reads like 5 at a time. Is like I don't even know. But actually, talking about that, do you have any recommendations, any books or resources for deconstructing?
um, that's a really good.
Definitely Kathy's book.
Yeah, I can't really hype that one up enough, and it sounds like I'm being paid to advertise, but I'm not. It was for somebody like me with an evangelical researching mind, and then kind of that whole Oxford research thing. I had to have something that was researched and intellectual. That's what I needed. And there were a lot of very good books and very personal books and kind of devotional books and coming out books. Amber's, in fact, was one of the early ones that I had read. Um, but like some of what I needed was more of that researched, intellectual, direct head-on thing because I had already spent all that time at Oxford. And to think I'm not alone, it took a book like Kathy's for me to say, there are people who've done the research. Thank God for them, because now everything that I would have wanted to say to somebody is in a book. Thanks. Now I don't have to write that one. That's a load off my shoulders. It's such a great book. So that is one of the critical ones. I read a lot on the history of homosexuality throughout time and history, particularly in the church. I can make some recommendations if you want to email me. I think my information is in here and available. I'd be glad to take a snapshot of my books and recommend some books that fit in there. And yeah,
Yes, and Kathy's book is called Walking the Bridgeless Canyon.
yeah, I think let me see. Yeah, we're almost like out of time. The last two things for me in that process of deconstructing, reconstructing, and putting my life together, therapy with an affirming therapist is so important, um, and maybe like a lifelong process, but such a beautiful and wonderful one. And if you can share with others, that's even better. And so, with Allison, we've kind of been there with each other through all of it. And the last one, sometimes it's just in your own community where you can get involved and find that sense of being affirmed and knowing that God loves you and there are others who are supportive. We're both musicians on the weekend after teaching all week. And so we look for opportunities around our area community where there's gay owned businesses, and we call them up and say, look, we'd like to come in and to help you and help your business. We'll just donate our time because we really just want to come and bring some attention and strength to you because of what you represent in our community. And then there's, LGBTQ groups in our community that we're a part of as well, besides New Abbey, which is like, if I were retired, I think we'd move to Pasadena to just be closer to that community. But we've got our kids in our GSA club. And so we try and balance it all.
And I put my honey's email in the chat for you guys, and I know Charlie's really good about answering emails, so much better than I am. So please feel free, and that's just why we wanted to do this, to tell you you are loved, and you are loved by God, and we just want to affirm you and tell you that. And we're thankful for all of you. Okay, Luke, I will send you, I want to make sure I just didn't send it to, it's I'll, I'll put it back in there. So thank you everyone for coming to this session. We have been talking about it for a long time and we did it. And we're so thankful for you and we hope that you are blessed. And honey, do you want to say a quick blessing?
Um, yeah, I also want to just say that part of the story is actually just being able to share yourself with others, and sometimes owning, where you have been, because that's hard to do, and owning a past that you're ashamed of and wish you could undo. Well, I mean, we're still breathing. We still have the chance to make a difference and move beyond our um, errors and mistakes and stubbornness, and denials and fears. So it's not too late, not too late at all. And the Lord bless you, keep you, and make his face to shine upon you and be with you evermore. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone. I love the bye to our students. We're so used to going like this.
Yeah. Bye, Allison.
Bye, Shally.